Sometimes when you write songs, you use a different name, right?
Well, I have to use a different name because my math is all over the internet under my name,
Uh-huh.
and the music is all over the internet under another. I don't want to have the same name for music and math. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why it makes sense to you.
Well, it just makes sense to me that you use I know people write under nom de plume,
Yeah.
but I guess I kind of want you to get credit for what you're creating.
Do you read it aloud?
You want me to
Yeah.
read it aloud? Okay, great. 100 Sides of Beshov. Or do you say Beshov?
Beshov.
Beshov. Yorgi Beshov's father ran the House of Mirrors at the Trolov amusement park. All the children knew Yorgi's father as Beshov, the Mirror Man. Sometimes I'd see Yorgi's father walking towards the park in the morning. He'd be holding a brown paper bag in his right hand. The owner of the park, Mr. Trolov, liked Beshov because all the children loved him. Would you like to see 50 or maybe 100 sides of yourself at once? He'd ask the children, who'd smile and nod before handing him their tickets. Yorgi's father liked to laugh. One day, a boy told him he didn't want to go into the House of Mirrors because he would never find his way out again. This made Yorgi's father burst out laughing, but the boy kept telling him he'd get lost in a place where he could see 100 sides of himself at once. Beshov assured the boy he wouldn't get lost if he held his hand. Yorgi's father and the boy walked down a long, dark corridor. When they reached the mirrors, the boy saw 100 sides of himself at once. He asked Yorgi's father which of the reflections was really him, and Yorgi's father said they all were. Sometimes Beshov's son Yorgi would meet his father on the Povich Bridge. Beshov crossed this bridge every day in the summer. Beshov would make a face at Yorgi when he saw him, and they'd walk home together to see Lenny and Tanya, who'd be cooking in the kitchen. If Beshov and Yorgi were late, Tanya would wonder if something terrible had happened to them. She'd wait on the porch until she saw them walking down the road. The Beshovs kept a cow and a goat in their yard. The goat would jump on the porch, move around, and make sounds, while the cow waved its tail back and forth. One day, Beshov was showing Yorgi how to shave the goat when it rammed him hard in the side. Beshov couldn't sit down for weeks after that, and he thought about getting rid of the goat. But Yorgi protested, and he asked his father to forgive the goat. On Saturdays, Yorgi and his friends would go to the amusement park, but Yorgi's father never gave Yorgi free amusement tickets and made him buy his own. Yorgi rarely went into the House of Mirrors, but he happened to go in one Saturday when his friend Sergei wanted to. When Yorgi stood in the mirrors, he noticed that he couldn't see all the ways in which they caught his image. Whenever he turned to see one side of himself, there was always another over his shoulder which he couldn't see. The mirrors could see more of Yorgi than he could, and each time he'd turn around, they'd show him a different side of himself. If Yorgi spent all his money at the amusement park, Tanya would yell at him. She'd call him crazy and make him chop wood in the yard. Sometimes Lenny could hear Yorgi chopping when she sat down to dinner, and she'd feel sorry for her brother. After dinner, she'd sneak him something to eat, but not if she was angry with him. He'd stay in the yard with the cow and the goat until Tanya told him to come in. But if Tanya was in a bad mood, she'd forget about Yorgi, and he'd end up sleeping with the goat. Beshov would always be walking with the goat when I'd see him on the Mika road. He'd be holding a long stick in his hand. When I'd pass him, he'd nod and grin. Sometimes he'd tell me he was rearranging the mirrors at the amusement park, but he'd never talk long, for he had to make sure the goat stayed close by. If the goat ran too far down the road, Beshov would go chasing after him, waving his stick in the air. He'd yell and call him a beast. Mr. Trolov was getting ready for his busiest month at the park, August. Much larger crowds would enter the House of Mirrors in August, dropping things all over the floor. Rearranging the mirrors in the house was a strenuous task for Georgi's father. Beshov asked Lenny if she'd come to the park to help with the sweeping. She said yes, of course, and walked with her father on the 1st of August. The park was packed as usual, and there were children of all shapes gathering around the ticket booths. They pulled at each other's clothing and made strange faces. The air was saturated with fair music which floated beyond the Ferris wheel, and the vending booths were covered with multicolored balloons. By the time Beshov and Lenny reached the House of Mirrors, there was already a crowd waiting to get in. Hundreds of hands grasped the wooden railings that led to the entrance of the house. They tugged and pulled on the freshly painted planks on the ramp. No need to push. "Everyone will get in," exclaimed Georgi's father as he unlocked the entrance to the house. A gray-haired woman and 6 children were first on line. People were almost pushing their tickets into Beshov's face. He'd let 40 in at a time. Lenny walked around in the house, picking up the hot dogs and cotton candy that people had dropped on the floor. Every so often, she'd see a different side of herself in the mirrors that Beshov had arranged the week before, but she couldn't see all of her sides at once. Whenever she turned to see one side of herself, there was always another over her shoulder, which she couldn't see. Lenny wanted to stay in the house for a while, but she heard Beshov calling her from the entrance. She threw the remaining food wrappers away and walked through a long, dark corridor. A man with a bowler hat and bushy black mustache spoke to Beshov in the wooden gazebo booth. "This is the best day we've had in months," said Mr. Trollope to Beshov, when Lenny appeared at his side in long, tight braids that fell across her shoulder. "Is this Lenny?" asked Mr. Trollope, who had only remembered her as a little girl. Lenny smiled. "Of course it's Lenny," said Beshov, who was a little surprised his boss had not recognized her right away. "She's blossomed into a lovely flower." "Thank you," said Beshov. Mr. Trollope frowned when he held out his hand and felt a raindrop. He could hear passers-by deciding to leave the park. When it started to pour, he told Beshov to close up for the evening. Groups of people went running past the House of Mirrors, holding coats over their heads, and mud splashed on the ramp of the house when a crate fell from a cart passing by. Beshov cringed at the thought of walking home in the pouring rain, and Lenny thought it unwise to let her 72-year-old father take risks with his health, so she suggested they spend the night in the House of Mirrors. The park was clearing out quickly, and the music had stopped. Beshov unlocked the house and walked in with Lenny. There were some candles on a shelf in a broom closet. Lenny began to sweep the floor. The air in the house was humid and musty. Beshov lit a candle and stood it on the wooden floor. Lenny noticed the lines in her father's face in the yellow light of the candle. Lenny sat down by the light. "I'm glad you are here today," said Beshov, glancing over at Lenny. "I'm glad you're glad," said Lenny, twirling her braid. There was a knock at the door. "Who could that be?" said Lenny, grabbing hold of the broom handle. Beshov looked out the window and saw a young man in a uniform. "It's a soldier," said Beshov. He walked to the entrance and opened the door. "Good sir, I'm Corporal Stodney of the 3rd Regiment Annex. I've been walking for a long time, and I'd like to get out of the rain. May I come in?" said the man whose face was bleeding on the left side. "Yes," said Beshov, signaling Lenny to stand up. The man tracked mud onto the wooden floor and held his hands on his right side. His eyes lit up when he saw Lenny standing in the candlelight. "What happened to your face?" said Beshov to the soldier, but he was too busy noticing the reflections of himself in the mirrors to answer. The soldier ran his hand through his wet hair. Lenny glanced at her father. "What is this place?" asked the soldier, leaning back against the wall. His wet face reflected the candlelight. Beshov remembered seeing the soldier earlier in the day on the ticket line. He had been leaning on the gazebo booth railing when Mr. Trollope had stopped. Lenny glanced at the wound on the soldier's face and noticed bloodstains on his lapel. The soldier watched Beshov from across the room, sitting quietly in front of the candle. Beshov glanced at Lenny as if he were going to say something. He turned towards the soldier. "You were here earlier today," he said. "That's right," said the soldier, looking around the room. "Then why did you ask what this place is?" said Beshov, standing up next to Lenny. "I felt like it," said the soldier, scratching his head with his finger. "Do you think you can do anything you feel like doing?" asked Beshov. "Certainly not," said the soldier. "There are plenty of things I feel like doing but can't do." The soldier glanced around the room at the images of himself in the mirrors on the walls. He noticed that he couldn't see all the ways in which they caught his image. He could see a certain number of sides of himself in one corner of the room, but if he wanted to see the other sides, he'd have to turn around and look in another corner. But when he did this, he couldn't see the sides that he had first seen. Whenever he'd look at one group of images, there'd always be another group which would remain hidden from him. He glanced at Beshov sitting in one corner. Beshov came to his feet and walked across the floor. "Do you think you can see more than 100 sides of yourself at once?" asked Beshov, standing by the soldier. "No," said the soldier, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket. "I think you can see a certain number of sides at one time and a certain number at another time, but not more than 100 at one time," said the soldier, taking one last look at the reflections he could see.
It's okay.